to what you said on paper.
I wish that I could freely dream and be judged from within, haunted by a power that cannot see past my skin. My views are viewed as ignorant, my truth always denied.
Well, welcome back to At the Round Table with MAMLEO. I'm your host, Ari Ellison, in studio with my brother. It is Memorial Day. My brother, veteran Dr. Willie Bradley, and veteran Pastor Franklin Hobbs. Let's say good morning to you, gentlemen, again, and thank you for your service. Yes, we are. I know. People saying, oh, yeah. I can't hear him either. I can hear him.
We're in the house.
There we go.
Yeah, we're in the house.
There we go.
It's nice to be here. You know, and thank you for mentioning that, man. I mean, yeah, I got out of the military in '79.
No, you guys have earned it.
Yeah, got out in '79.
Wow, that's.
They asked me if I wanted to re-up. I would say to them, man, listen, my next assignment is Fort Living Room, Massachusetts. That's where I'm going. You know, I'm going home. I mean, that's it. I'm done. You know, I'm not gonna stay in this, man. They wanted me to re-up, and in fact, I did my overseas tour in Korea. Okay. You know, when you go in and you do this. This dream sheet where you want to go, the blue sheet, and I wanted to go to Stuttgart, Germany. Yeah, and I wanted to go to Europe. I had never been to Europe, you know. And they said, "Yeah, you're gonna go to Stuttgart, all right?" They sent me to Busan. They cut my orders to Busan. The Busan would be like Las Vegas, you know, because it's at the very tip of the peninsula. I get to Seoul. They say, "You going to Uijeongbu?" Uijeongbu is about 12 miles from the DMZ. Which is the opposite direction. If I go any farther, I'll be in North Korea. You know what I mean? So I was actually in the communication center on a place called Camp Red Cloud. And it was actually providing communications for all the Korean forces and the American forces and the Britain forces that was actually on the island. And whenever commands come in from Washington, it goes directly to the communication center that I was working in, and we kind of disperse it out to the various commanders. So everybody wanted to kill you. You know what I mean? Because you had all the information. You were actually the individual, had the data and had all the plans. So you were the objective of the enemy forces to get you. So we were very heavily armed and very well protected. You know, so you had to be pretty much qualified in various weapons and stuff like that. So it was an interesting. It was interesting. But I was only 20 something years old, you know. So I was like young and stupid. Now I look at it like, dude, you know, you was on the DMZ in 1977 on Christmas Eve. Yeah. I'm like, my God, what was I thinking? You know. Yeah.
Well, the good thing is you gentlemen made it back.
Amen.
You know, in one piece, and I think that's why, you know, those of us who, like I said, are out there every day, you know, putting it on the line. We see what's happening in this country, and like, you know,
it hurts. You know, like I said, when we saw in the previous broadcast, in previous hour, we were talking about the January the 6th event, you know, and I said, you know, one of the things that really angered me was the Confederate flag being in the halls of Congress. Right. And I was, you know, I protected that. You know, I protected the rights to protest, but not the right to just violate our institution like that, you know?
Yeah.
There's a right way to do it. What they did was not correct. I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with going and voicing your opinion and standing and posting your signs. That's legitimate protest. But when you're attacking the institution like that, I have a problem with that.
No, but some folks, they feel like they're being patriotic in that way. Okay. And like I said, and you have a former leader of this free world who's saying that is the acceptable behavior, that is the acceptable way to deal with disputes, is to overthrow the government. Like I said, this happens in authoritarian regimes, and he wants to bring it to a country near you.
I'm not stroking my own back on this, man, but I predicted that, though.
Yeah.
If you recall some of the conversations we had in the previous, I
said
it.
He was running for king.
He was running for king. Everybody else was running for president, but that's too limited for this particular guy. He wanted to have a king. He wanted to be king, and our history and our record of smooth transition of power was no longer is going to be broken because he's not going to do it.
Yeah.
He's not that kind of guy. That's not his mindset.
Right. So I wanted to, they've been talking about reparations and stuff here in the city and around the country, and there was this exchange between a professor at Amherst and a white student who, was talking about reparations and how he feels about it, and that he's in favor of it until, and I'll let you guys, and we're going to talk about it after.
To make room for a disadvantaged minority, yes or no? After World War II, the white middle class soared to prosperity as a result of bills like the GI Bill. And African Americans who were coming home from war didn't get those benefits simply because they were African American. The U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs denied African Americans access to those benefits simply because of their race. And you are correct in saying that no one today dealt with that particular issue. With that being said, however, there was wealth amassed as a result of those programs that still exists today. And when I think of your example about an individual who works as a janitor and sees people dining in a beautiful cafe walking home from work, I want to ask you, do you think any of that indignation, given certain circumstances, might actually be justified simply because there have been systematic blocks in people's way throughout American history? Not ending with slavery, not ending with the Jim Crow laws, not ending, some would say even today, we still have housing discrimination. All of which is to say, you found that during the Cold War era, there was a massive boom in the white middle class's prosperity, and you just didn't have that among African Americans, not because they weren't meritorious, but because they were discriminated against. Are you actually saying that you believe in a rule of social justice today that says globally, let's look at this as a global rule of justice, I'm going to figure out whose ancestors did what to whom, and I'm going to return goods that were illicitly taken from the beginning to the people who had it originally? Do you believe that that's a viable way to organize our society? Do you believe, if I can ask you a direct question, that you are the beneficiary of white privilege here at Amherst? I yes do. Or no? Well, yeah, and I'll pause. Okay. If you are, can I ask you a further question? Oh, okay, yeah, but I don't just say it in a I don't say it in a self-flagellating and self-aggrandizing way. Okay, go on. You know, I really try not to. I'm simply saying that because you asked me. Really, I view the recognition of one's privilege as an impetus to change things. So I don't just say I have white privilege. I try to help those who have not benefited from such privilege. How? Hold on. Let's pursue this for a moment. You say, this is actually very important because there's a psychology here, right? Well, you see, I'm going to answer your question, but I'm really not trying to attack you. I'm not trying to be provocative. I just find that often, I think the essence of much of this discourse surrounds hypocrisy, and you're trying to demonstrate that I'm a hypocrite. I say I benefit from white privilege, yet I don't actually do anything. But I'm gonna backpedal and say that ultimately I think what the greatest vice is cruelty, and I don't want to be hypocritical. So to answer your question, I'll start in high school. Do people want to hear this, or do we? Educated, yeah. Let them know. Look, let me say where I'm going with this, because I think you're. All right, well.
Well, too bad.
All I was to say, it's not like I picked anyone out to help based on the color of their skin, but I was a tutor for people who tended to be low income when I was in high school. I suppose that would be one direct answer to your question, because oftentimes disparate educational opportunities are grounded in disparate economic systems or systems that produce disparate economic outcomes. So that's one way that I would combat it on an individual level.
All right. Here's what I'm getting.
Now, I'm going to play the second part, because this is the professor. Now, he is saying he's an advocate for, all the things that are wrong and ill, and how, Black Americans have not been treated fairly and have not gotten their just dues, and that, we need to do more. And now here's the professor's response to what would he do, what would this student do to help to facilitate that happening.
Economic outcomes. So that's one way that I would combat it on an individual level.
All right. Here's what I'm getting with this, okay? One of the benefits of a good education of reading people like Nietzsche is you begin to understand how deep the human desire is for moral self-exculpation. Moral self-exculpation. Now, you say, and I didn't say this, you said this, I'm a beneficiary of illicit white privilege. Okay?
Illicit?
Isn't all white privilege illicit?
Yeah.
Is it deserved?
Well, in this current system, there is legality.
Illicit means immoral.
Okay. Then,
immoral white privilege.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll say that.
So then if I were to say to you, there are surely many deserving minorities who would like to come to Amherst but have the inherited disadvantage of American history. Therefore, since you are an acknowledged beneficiary of illicit privilege, would you be willing to step aside voluntarily, putting your own moral mouth where your self-proclaimed virtue is, and give your seat, not my seat. I realize you may be super generous with other people's advantages and favor affirmative action, so other white kids who apply to Amherst are turned away to open spaces for minorities. But I'm not talking about you acting out your virtue on them. I'm talking about you acting out your virtue on you. Mm-hmm. Are you willing to give up your illicit seat that you don't deserve here at Amherst to make room for a disadvantaged minority? Yes or no?
That's the problem.
Right. So there you have it. And the reason why I wanted to bring that and highlight that is that it reminded me of when driving through during the Black Lives Matter, and you see all these signs in suburban neighborhoods and all. So that's the feel good. That's the I'm making the argument. The student is making the case of the disadvantages that minorities have been through. And yet when he's challenged to say, okay, you're in a position where you could make a difference personally, not talk about what others can do, what you can actually do, would you give up your seat?
And I hear how the professor phrased it, but my response to that would have been, no, I would not. But what I would do is that I would fight and help actually create a system by which everything would be fair. So the next time up, it's a fair process. That's the issue. Yeah. It's not that I'm relinquishing my seat. Right. It is because you have this self-fulfilling prophecy that we're stupid. And since we are not, you're creating situations where we're in adverse, deprived educational institutions. And then that education institution doesn't produce an educated individual, and you say, well, it's not the institution, it's the individual, so therefore that person can't move forward. So I would say, why don't we actually deal with the real issue, and that is to make sure that the playing field is fair at all levels of our system, so that when it comes time to compete for that seat, that person of color has an equal shot.
Well, I would.
That's how I would do it.
No, right, but to your point about whether or not they think we have the intelligence, right? A lot of times you can be the smartest person in the world, but if you don't have the financial means to get there, right, you're just peering, like pressing your nose up against that bakery window, right? You're just getting the smell.
Yeah, exactly. Or you may have opportunities to go to an education, and the institution is there, but the institution is so violent that you can't get the education you need to compete. So there's other little things that they're putting in, little pokers they're putting into the fire to make sure that you get burnt. All right. So the way that the professor argued it, I hear what he's saying, but I thought they were skirting around the real issue. The real issue is, not having a system in place that's going to be fair at educating each other from the onset, from preschool all the way up to high school. So that now I have equal access to that seat.
Right.
Now, if you outcompete me, you're better than I am, I'm fine with it. I can't, I can't beat every child in the schoolyard, but you know what I mean? I'm going to get some punches in.
Right.
But if you're putting me in a dysfunctional school system and then have me compete against a person from a functional school system, that is the unfair process.
And to that point, I see a lot of law enforcement personnel, their children are now coming on the job.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of their children were not educated in the Boston public school system, but they moved back here for the opportunity, right, to be able to, because of the residency requirement, right? So these children who grew up in the suburban schools, who were formally educated, have way more of an advantage than trying to get someone. You worked in the Randolph school systems. You saw how it was. I currently still am in the BPD to BPS system, and I'm saying, on a daily basis, a lot of these kids would not even be able to get past the entry level. Probably wouldn't even know how to fill out a form for a cadet job, let alone become a police officer and then move up the chain to become one of the few captains that we have of color.
It wouldn't happen because they're in an environment. They're in an environment where insecurity, fighting, violent behavior is the norm.
Yeah.
We already know, through Abraham Maslow, you're not going to get an education, which is at the top of that pyramid, when you're feeling that you're not safe.
Right. And pivoting for a second, talking about the violence in the schools and outside the school. This was really a violent week in the city of Boston. We had a homicide Monday across the street from a school. The next day, we had an individual who they caught on camera at Gallivan in Washington Street, firing a weapon at 12:30 in the afternoon. The day before the one on Monday, that was at 4:45 in the afternoon. Students were still in the school. And then the next day, down on
Gallivan in Washington is right down the street here.
Right, yeah. I had called Pastor Wall. I said, hey, I don't know if you're in the church, but there is an active shooter. And this is not a drill for what you have upcoming. But there's an active shooter in the neighborhood. I just want to make sure you guys are okay. And he said, no, they weren't here. But yes, this was a school within a block away, was the Henderson School from that incident. And then on Wednesday, we have the Wild Wild West down on Charlotte Ave, where there's two individuals shooting back and forth at each other, and there are children and others right in the middle. And this is 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So there's an intolerance, unfortunately, of violence that is taking place in our communities, and it doesn't seem to be a pushback from the community. Because I'm looking at the brazenness of all of these shooters, and they're not really trying to hide per se. A couple of them have on a hoodie or something, but I mean, from some of the still, you can clearly see and identify them, and someone out there knows who they are.
How many of those shootings are? What is the percentage of closure of those cases, though? A clearance of those cases?
I don't know what the current status is of them, but I can tell you this, that as of this week, I don't know of any arrests on any of those.
Because I'm beginning to think that people become confident that they're not going to be held accountable. Then there's a high likelihood that they're not going to be arrested. Then they're making a decision on that calculation that, hey, listen, I can do this and I'm going to get away with it. There's a high likelihood I'm going to get away with it. So why am I concerned about not doing it when no one's going to hold me accountable for it? I'm going to do it anyway. You know what I mean?
Right.
So are they being held accountable? That's one side of the argument. The other side of the argument is that police department is not the panacea to all our social ills.
Right.
And so we need to make sure that we understand that that community component to law enforcement. We have, as law enforcement, we have kind of lost that component, and that is how do we actually begin to work with the community again? We keep talking about this, but it's not happening because the community sees it, and the community can be much more cooperative or much more involved in resolving this situation.
Well, you're on target as usual, but I think what's happened, Dr. Bradley, is that people feel that accountability is only has to be meted out by law enforcement in the criminal justice system, right? And when we were growing up, accountability was it started in your house, in your household. It started in your neighborhood, right? And that this type of behavior, if people saw it, that's why you don't go in certain neighborhoods and conduct yourself this way, because if people see you doing it, they're going to say you're doing it, right? And they're going to be willing to come in. And that's the only way to stop. That's how it was when I was growing up.
Well, I think we need to go. So when we start talking about, well, people are doing these things, well, they're doing it with impunity.
Exactly.
They're doing it because they're not being held accountable, because the people that actually see it, they don't want to be involved in it. There was a time in our lifetime when we had a bad kid in the community, everyone knew who he was. And everyone was able to actually say, well, we're going to step forward and make sure it doesn't. The guys in the community like, dude, this is not happening. So the community got to become more involved. But one of the things that I often tell my students when I'm talking about community is the bonding component of community. You know what I mean? And when we were kids, we were able to enjoy the basketball courts and all those things. So we were being a kid, so you had that relationship. Those relationships are no longer there in the community today.
617-282-0685, 617-282-0685. Listening to At the Round Table with MAMLEO. I'm your host, Larry Ellison. In studio with my brother, Dr. Bradley, is in the house of doctors, giving you a checkup from the neck up. Like I said, happy Memorial Day to all of our veterans out there. But to your point, Dr. Bradley, you're talking about the playground just made me have thought, because like yesterday I responded to where at one of the schools, and these are young kids who went into the playground of another school. These kids are fighting and threatening each other. I mean, the brutality that they're inflicting on each other. Went into the playground of one of the other schools and destroyed it. And then we're on social media setting fire to T-shirts and stuff with that school's name on it, and just the violence and the videos of them inflicting violence in front, instead of being in the library, they're outside the library just beating each other mercifully. These are young. These are exactly that. These kids can't even. They have to have police protect to go from their school across the street so they can enjoy the park. And even then, melee breaks out. And I'm just sitting here shaking my head. It's like, what am I? This is above me as a police. What am I supposed to do with kids that young who? I agree that the system said they should not be criminalized for their behavior, but there's nothing in place to deal with it. And yet, so by default, you dial 911 and we show up.
So the question becomes, the
expectation.
What do you expect the police department to do when the law says that, you can only make an arrest at a certain age? That's the first thing.
Correct.
The second thing is that when you implement this particular policy, this law, then what do you have to replace, to address those behaviors? Because the behavior is not going anywhere.
Well, to that point, they claim that the social workers and psychologists.
Well, why are you calling the cops then? Why don't you call the social workers and the psychologists? Well, because you're saying that 11 o'clock. I'm 11 o'clock. At age 11 now or 12, you can
under the age of 12.
Under the age of 12. So what are you doing? What social apparatus do you have in place to deal with the aberrant, bad behavior of kids who are under 12?
Well, you're right, because the argument was that law enforcement was criminalizing this behavior. This was a behavior in the school, and so. By default and by necessity, right, law enforcement pulled back for the most part with dealing with that population. Now they're saying, well, it's not as easy as we thought it was going to be, right? That social workers and all of this and psychologists and medication, that was going to say. So no one told these kids that the behavior had to change, right?
Well, see, this is my argument, though. My argument is okay, so is it or is it not a crime when you haul off and hit someone across the head with a stick?
If you're under the age of 12, it is not. You're not criminally responsible.
The law says that is not a crime. Not the age, the behavior.
It's not a crime. They're not legally responsible for their behavior. So it is not. It is. You could label it as criminal, but there would be no actions that would be taken by law enforcement.
There's no criminal justice ramification
for children under the age of 12.
So what is the replacement for that, though? So when
you hear the silence,
So because to me that's a poor public policy. So when you actually take that particular layer of responsibility away, or addressing that behavior, because the behavior is criminal.
Right.
But the individual is not. The individual is not charged because he's underage.
Right.
So what do you have to replace?
Nothing. And we're seeing the fallout from that, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And not only are we seeing the fallout, but there is active recruiting by
exactly.
gang members.
That's my point.
To that
That's my point,
population.
because we all know this happened. It's happened when we were kids.
That's right.
You know what I mean? You want a cigarette? Could you go buy this for me? You know what I mean? So you want to sell this? Hey, you go sell it on the corner, because they're not going to do anything to you. They're not doing anything. So you have to have a behavior, an apparatus there to replace what you're removing, so that you can still address that issue, and it may not be criminalized. You don't have to, I'm not arguing that.
And we're in agreement.
Yeah, it may be a vehicle, but it got to be something. You just can't say, "Well, you're gonna just go out into society and continue until you get to 12."
There
Once
you
get
go.
12, I got you.
There you go. You age out. Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. There are stages. See, you hit it right on the head. There are stages. Now you turn 12. Now we can get the courts involved. But even then, it's very limited, right? And I agree. We're trying to redirect, right? We're trying to correct the behavior, right? Not punish juveniles. That's always been since the beginning of time, right? There's not criminalizing juvenile behavior.
Yeah.
But we also know it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, because I do agree that in statistically and scientifically, we have looked at the development of the human brain. We know that the human brain doesn't fully develop until in the early 20s. But as it relates to, to a civil society, you still must have some type of social apparatus in place to deal with aberrant bad behavior of kids who are just in the developing stages.
We were children, right?
Yeah.
And if allowed to, I would have had cereal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Never brushed my teeth. Never went to school. Probably bathed once a month. Mm-hmm. So, but those choices were not left to me as a child. So what we've said is that now we have taken away responsibility in a lot of ways from parents and holding them accountable and saying, okay, your children can do whatever they want. That's the pipeline to prison, because you might get away with that until you turn of age where now, it's embedded in you where this behavior is acceptable. Where do you think you're going to go get a job if you're assaulting your coworkers or people in general, right? What college campus do you know wants someone on there who is posting videos of themselves with guns, whether they're real or not, and has a history of violent behavior?
Yeah, but see, the other thing is like, and I'm unfortunately I have to go back to and when I was a child, because the community stepped in that gap.
Right.
See,
right.
The
village.
village. The village stepped in the gap. The village said, you know what, we're going to get you before you go to the criminal justice system. You know what I mean? And parents, because I remember this, distinctly as a child. I was the one who negotiated with the community members. Listen, this is straight, right? I mean, I did this and you took care of me. Don't tell my sister. Don't tell my mother. I mean, because I knew that what was coming my way if they heard about it, and oftentimes they did.
Right.
So I got a double whammy, because and we didn't even care about the police department.
Right.
That wasn't
Didn't need them.
You didn't need them. It wasn't in the mix. But in today's society, everybody is so litigious focused.
Right.
If you hit my child, I'm going to sue you. And I'm not advocating abuse of a child. What I'm saying is that you have to have some type of mechanism in that gap before that individual ages out and change that behavior. Because once they get to that behavior, criminal justice is not going to be lenient on them.
Right. Well, when you said something, just made me think about my childhood. I remember, growing up, right. The police, someone you saw passing through the neighborhoods, right? Didn't see them really, and then I remember when you did see them stop on your street and go into a house, everyone came down there because that was a big deal. It wasn't something that happened on a regular basis, right? You're like, oh my God, what's going on? What's going on? And that is what we need to get back to. Is that it's so normal, right? And I'm just say this, and I'll let you. Because the other day, what was shocking to me, Dr. Bradley, was the homicide that took place on Columbia Road, right across from the Frederick School. And so Columbia Road was shut down from Geneva Avenue all. And this is right around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So exactly.
You got people moving around and going to come on.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You're shut down because this crime scene it entailed both sides of the street. You know, watching the video that they were showing on the news where the vehicle came and went over the median back onto the other side from one side. I say this because now, because of the direction of the victim and all that, in the show, both sides had, and it was blocked down for quite a while. So now parents couldn't get to the school. And parents were coming up and they were screaming at those of us, right, because of the inconvenience. And I said to I said, well, you know, someone just lost their life, and I understand the inconvenience. It wasn't our plan to get up this morning and block off this street. We understand what time it is, but we don't get to pick what time these things happen. And the response, troubling, was, that's not my problem. My problem is you're inconveniencing me. The fact that I just told you that someone had lost their life, and that it could have been worse because our babies, our young people in the public are out here at this time of the day. People are traveling. Luckily, it was bad as it was. It could have been worse.
Heartless, man.
And you're angry because
of inconvenience.
Inconvenience.
Man, where have we gone?
That's what I'm talking about. So how do you combat that? Please help me.
I don't
understand.
know. You know what I mean? But I do know one thing. You know, is that all respect for authority, all respect for life, starts at the home. Yeah. I do know that my respect for authority, my respect for people who are my elders, all my sense of respect and honor started in my home.
But when's the last time you heard a young person referring to in the respect that you, like I said, that was instilled in you, right?
Yeah.
You respect your elders. Yeah. When's the last time you heard a young person use that phrase?
There lies the breakdown of that particular issue in society.
Right.
Because what we have done is that we have attacked the very basic element of society, which is the family. Right. We have been moving components of the family in and out into institutions, and Pastor Hobbs just actually went to one of those events where we try to come up with how do you re-welcome returning citizens back into the community. You know, oftentimes those returning citizens look like you and me. Right. You know, so that that authoritative figure, mom is now playing two roles. Right. Mom is being mom, she's being dad, she's been protector, she's been provider, and so at what point do you have to raise and graze the child? So that's where I think the problem is.
But even to that point, and we'll bring this call in, growing up, is even when you became an adult, right, and you had all the responsibilities of being a father, a husband, right, you still respected the adults who were older. You still didn't say, well, now I'm an adult, I can swear in front of them, I can do. You still did not conduct yourself in a disrespectful way in front of adults. If you were on a bus and an elderly person or a woman got on the bus, you got up and gave your seat.
Absolutely.
You gave your seat.
I do it to this day.
That's what I'm saying. You come to the door. You hold the door. Yeah. I took to a woman one day. Recently I was holding the door for her, and she's like, "Oh my God!" She says, "I haven't seen anyone do that in a long time." I said, "Ma'am, chivalry isn't dead. It's just on life support."
It's on life support. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Because it's very few, but I do it to this day. Right. I mean, I was actually in the airport. My wife and I were moving from the terminal to our car, and an elder lady got up. And I got on, and I'm sitting there. I got up. I was like, "No, please." She was like, "No." I was like, "Ma'am, please sit down. I can handle this." You know what I mean?
And now these kids will fight you for the seat.
You got that right.
Good morning, caller. Welcome to the round table.
Good morning. I just have a question. Maybe you can answer it, or you can't. But my question is, why are these politicians are so used to being reactive and not proactive? And let me explain. With the recent the recent shootings that took place.
Which one do you refer to? There's been several, so let's break them down.
The one that happened this past Monday,
The homicide.
Yes.
Okay.
And the one that happened this past Wednesday in broad daylight.
So there was one Tuesday as well. Don't forget that one. The one.
Yep.
Okay. There was the shots fired there up at, and luckily in those last two incidents that no one was hit. But the trauma from that, I mean, when you have to lock down schools and lock down communities and you have active shooters, and even the other day at the homicide, the disconnect, I was telling Dr. Bradley, the disconnect from the community of the concern that someone was just murdered. And they're only, in some instances, not all, some people were empathetic, but the vast majority was, I am being inconvenienced from being able to get where I need to go. And that's all I'm concerned about. I am not concerned about, I shouldn't say not concerned, but it's not, they told me it was not their problem. That was my problem. I needed to deal with what was taking place there, and that they were unplugged from that. So this is becoming a common theme. And if we're expecting politicians, even law enforcement, to solve all of our problems, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. That's not breaking news. That's just reality. It's not going to happen.
Because again, the law enforcement is not a panacea to all our social ills.
We are an extension of the community.
That's right.
And we are most times, if you watch a video, any of those videos, did you see any law enforcement in the picture while this was taking place?
Most people won't commit a crime in front of law enforcement because they know what's going to happen.
Right.
They wait until the law enforcement officers no longer around.
And a perfect example of that, the shooter in Nashville, he had scoped out several schools before he chose the Catholic school.
Yeah.
And in his manifesto, he said the reason why he didn't choose some of the other schools because they had armed police officers at the school.
Security. I would never gotten there. I went to the path of least resistance.
Right, exactly. So your question was,
why are some of these politicians are we active and not proactive? Huh?
Well, I guess that's a question for them. But what I can say is that what I see is there's no accountability, right? There's been a lot of, it's campaign season every year in Massachusetts. And this year it's at the local level, at the city level, right? And people are always promising things. Well, now the report card should come out. Let's look at what you promised and what you've delivered, right? I can tell you they gave themselves nice hefty pay raises, right? But the schools are still in disarray. How's Mass and Cass working now? Have you been down there lately?
You mean Michelle's Mile?
Michelle's Mile.
But brother, one of the things that I often say to folks when we're talking about assessing how well our politicians have done their job, because fortunately in our system we can actually reassess every so often. We call that the voting system. But you got to come to the table ready to issue your charges, your debate. Listen, this is what you said to us.
Right.
This is what happened. So,
but then they said, give me 4 more years.
Why should I support you? Why should I support you? Oftentimes we come there, we want to be kind, we want to be nice, we want to just show people that we can speak, so on and so forth. But we are not getting to the point. You got to come to that meeting, come to that community meeting and that outing, ready to actually put your argument on the table. You know what? I did my research. This is what you said. You said you're going to deal with this this Mass and Cass.
Right.
All right. So how is that working out for you?
Well, the schools. So Dick, if you were giving a report card, I think I already know what Dr. Bradley would give him an F and maybe even an E. How would you grade the people that are running? Because this year it's the city councilors, excuse me, that are up for re-election. How many of them would you keep and how many would you fire? And who would you keep and who would you fire?
I would keep, since he's no longer winning this year, Frank Baker. And I would get with the other 12 city councilors because none of them have done any work, especially supporting T. Michael Thomas's People's Academy, because this man has been doing this out of pocket for almost 20 years. And even though people because again, I'm not a politician, and they can't do anything to me because I call them out by name. Julie Mahita, she has so-called supported him, but yet she had to give him the resources necessary. The Haitian American City Council at large, I can't pronounce her name correctly, she's on the fence. By that I mean she hasn't publicly say if she's going to help the man. Erin Murphy, who's an ex-Boston school teacher, I don't hear her saying that even though he's a teacher, not in the type of public schools, is it giving him the resources necessary? And Michael Flaherty, he just like a no-show.
And then you have so then my follow-up to you is how many of them do you think will lose their job? The only one, like Frank Baker, because he's not running, right? But how many of them do you think will not successfully be reelected? Now, mind you, Michael Flaherty and Julia Mejia topped the tickets for the at-large city council, right? So Julia Mejia, the first time she ran, she won by 1 vote, literally 1 vote. It was a tie. They had a runoff. She won by 1 vote. And then the next time she came around, people thought, like I said, we vote a lot of times name familiarity. She topped the ticket she topped the ticket at large. So if you're saying she's not doing a good job, how is she getting reelected? How are they getting reelected?
Well, my answer to you is all 12 city councils is going to get reelected. Again, I'm not Nostradamus here, but I go with the record and learn from history. Yeah? Because I said this many times before, when we have a community, especially black and brown people, who are so used to be trained, conditioned, programmed, and brainwashed to listen to these city councilors and not have a mind of their own to say, you know what, let me do some research. Let me have a background that's independent. Now listen to what these candidates say on their website, because let's face it, they can lie on their website and yet...
Are you saying politicians are not honest?
Yeah, again, I will admit some politicians aren't honest, huh? But there are many liars out there.
I hear you, brother.
So, I'm curious as to what you think might be the solution to this quagmire that we're in. And I say that because, okay, Mayor Wu, who is the chief executive of the city of Boston, ran on fixing mass and cats and ran on fixing the schools, and honestly ran away from the public safety piece, honestly, because, you know, there's a distance that was put there because people thought law enforcement were the problem. You know, I go out every day and I put on the line for the folks here in the city of Boston, you know, as well as Dr. Bradley did and his lovely wife who's just retired. And then there's an alarming number of officers who are retiring earlier than they normally would be, right? And there's a vacuum there, and it's not attractive. You know, Boston put out the call for lateral transfers. For those people who don't know what that means, it means that if you work for another, this is something Boston does very rarely. The last time it was done during Ed Davis' administration when he was a commissioner because of the shortage. And in this instance, Boston put out statewide and said, look, come join our force, come join our department. We really need your help. And historically, we always got more applicants than we could
because we pay
process,
well.
right?
Pay extremely well.
Do you know how many people they just swore in that laterals from statewide for this call? Do you know how many we ended up getting, Dicka?
About 100.
3.
That's very, very low.
3 people in other departments throughout this whole Commonwealth.
Only 3 decided that they will come to
3
Boston.
people. And those 3 lived in the city. That's the reason why, right? The big issue is what's going on here. They feel like that it's not, the support isn't there. It's more extremely expensive to live in the city of Boston. And a lot of them factored in if they had children, what were they going to do for their education?
Well, they're going to send them to the Boston public school system, or they have to go to the private school.
Right, and there's
but
another expense.
why should I pay for that?
Right.
When I'm in a good school system? So if I go home and say to my wife, hey, listen, I'm going to become a Boston police officer, and I'm living in, you know, we'll say Whitman, and my wife says, hey, listen, I'm not moving to Boston. And more importantly, my kids are not going to the Boston public school system. So if you're going to go on the job in Boston, you have to pay for an education. So are you really making more money? You know, you may be bringing home more, but more is going out because now you got to pay for an education because my kids are not safe in a school system that's as dysfunctional as Boston.
Right.
So I can see only getting 3. Right. You know, I'm surprised you got any. Be honest with you. You know what I mean? Because it's just not. It's not a wise decision.
No, but I'm
for
saying,
family man.
Right. And then on top of that, having to be ordered to work all the time. We're coming into the summer, right, where things are heating up. We're into a vacation.
So, well, that goes back to because one of my students out of Curry, I had to actually work with him because he was accepted to the Boston Police Academy. How many people that you have you're graduating out of the academy?
They've been in for probably maybe a little less than a month now, so they've got a ways to go. But what I'm hearing, I mean, you know, you've been there, Dr. Bradley. You see every day the order coming out, resignation of this person. So I think they started with maybe 160. I think we'll be lucky if we get maybe 100. But by the time that class graduates at the end of this year, probably will lose more than that, and if not, then in January, when we usually get that another wave of people who leave in January, it's kind of you'll see that it will negate any games that we may have had. We're short, depending on who you ask, between 300 and 400.
Yeah, I'm hearing about that too. About 400 people. Like you mentioned earlier, my wife retired, and I was hearing that her class, the amount of people who retired, from her class, they don't have people backfilling.
No,
so that created a gap, with people, as it relates to personnel. So which create more force overtime.
Exactly, and people like your wife could have stayed another 7 or 8 years, right? And that's what I'm saying.
She came on young. She came on when she was in her 20s,
right? So
she had another 11 years.
She could have stayed.
And
it was. I remember people filing lawsuits because they turned 65 against age discrimination because they did not want to leave. And now, as soon as the stars line up and the numbers line up, people are out of it, and you can't replace that talent away.
You can't. It's a brain drain. It's a brain drain. There's no question about it. When she left, she had another 11 years to go.
She could have.
But when we look at the numbers, I was like, honey, you're going to be losing money,
right?
And now she was like, yeah, you're right. So we decided
time to pull
the plug. So she got 2 retired cops that are happily married and just living their lives. But and on the other side of it, we look at what's going on and say, well, we have
it's not an inviting culture.
Yeah, exactly.
So Ditka, what do we do here with like I said, it's an election year, and we've already kind of analyze that these folks will be reelected, those who run, even with this recent flare up with Ricardo Arroyo, right, and Rachel Rollins, from all allegations there that there was a conspiracy there to fabricate or put something out there about Kevin Hayden that may or may not have been true, but just to be engaging in that type of behavior, in my opinion, would be a disqualifier for. That's why I said when we talked about the hypocrisy, I'm not saying that, folks, we understand it happens a lot quicker for us than it does for others. That's the part that I have issue with, but I don't take issue with people being held accountable. But if the public isn't holding themselves accountable in a meaningful way and saying to these folks, you're fired, we're not going to hire you, we're not going to renew your contract, we have all of these problems and all these issues taking place, and yet we don't have the public engaged in a meaningful way, then how do we combat this?
Yeah. No. Well, my answer won't be easy, but it's going to be quaint. and my answer is the community, the black and brown community, has got to learn to stop getting along to go along, because it has not been working out for a very long time. They need to stand up on their own 2 feet, take a strong look at themselves, and ask the tough questions about the economical, the social, the political, and the spiritual side of how the community is doing or not doing this case. And then whenever a politician do come or shows up when it's election year, or even a candidate for that matter, and the candidate says something that's going to be a feel-good story or something nice for us to hear, then we would just say, no, have some proof, back it up with your statement or your actions. If not, then we're not going to elect you. Well, but yet, I don't see anything going to come to fruition for what I just said.
But I think that if you look it up in the dictionary, that's a definition of insanity, right? We're doing the same thing, expecting a different result. And again, I don't blame politicians, because like Donald Trump is a perfect example. They'll do what they can get away with. When there is an appetite and there is a population that will support you, and a lot of times people say, well, I'm not supporting them. You are supporting them if you don't vote. If you don't vote them out, you're basically, whether you say I'm not agreeing with them, but if you're not doing anything to remove them, then you're signing on to that behavior.
Yeah, I agree. You're right. I agree with you. Yeah. You're endorsing it through a tacit, behavior.
Right.
You're not doing anything. You're just completely silent.
You're complicit in that way, and people don't see. I'm like, because there are more people that don't vote, Dr. Bradley, than do in the city of Boston.
Well, but the other side, though, we have to recognize that the fact that people in office who are finagling the bagel, doing what they need to do to suppress the vote, to make it difficult for people to vote. And so I would say to folks, regardless of what obstacles are before you, remember that people died for that right.
Are still dying.
And are still dying for it.
Are still dying.
So you need to get out and you need to do it.
Yeah.
You need to make sure. So if it requires you to bring some lunch, bring some lunch. If you need a bottle of water, bring the water with you.
Right.
If you're in Georgia and you can't call your son to bring you some water, get yourself a lawn chair and get yourself a cooler and bring it with you.
Right.
Because it may take a while, but that's all design. That's in the design to suppress it. Just like our forefathers had to deal with poll taxes. They had to deal with exams and all those nonsense approaches to prevent voting. They're coming up with a new way to prevent us from doing it.
21st century of it,
we got to do it, though.
Of Jim Crow. It's alive and well. And like I said, we are repeating history because a lot of folks don't understand their history.
Amen.
I'm
a history guy.
That's what I'm saying. When you look at all this stuff, this is not new.
Nope.
Donald Trump is just the modern day version of George Wallace.
That's all it is.
Ron DeSantis, they're all packed. Bull Connors. These are not new people.
Nope.
These are just not new ideas. They're just new people packaged in the same thing. That was rhetoric and it was working. And now there's folks, like I said, who feel like in some way that they're victims of this because those people now want jobs and those people want to provide for their families. We can't have that.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I tell you something. A rotten egg is a rotten egg, regardless of the container it comes in. You know what I mean? It's still a rotten egg. You know what I mean? So that's pretty much how I see it. What you're seeing is the same old argument, but in a different package.
Yeah. So, Dick, what's your agenda for getting these folks out? I know you're someone who's plugged in, who's engaged, but there's not a whole lot of people like yourself.
I want to just make this quickly. For those that don't vote, that you have no right to complain about your circumstances because you had a chance to do your right to vote people in and vote people out, though. And that's one thing about the black and brown community has got to drop that bad habit.
Yeah.
Until that happens, for us personally, the thing's not going to change. Like you said, it's the definition of insanity. It's doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
Amen. Thank you, sir. Enjoy your weekend and stay safe.
Interesting you said that because I was watching something on television and from a guy in Texas was complaining about the guns. And I looked at my wife and I said, but you're voting for the same guy who actually support the NRA. Yeah. I mean, you voted for this governor who actually support the idea of assault weapons in society, but you're complaining about people using assault weapons to attack the school. Why don't you try voting this guy out?
Hello. Hey, like I said, that's the insanity part.
Yeah.
Caller, good morning. Welcome to the roundtable.
Good morning, my brothers. How are you? This is Cliff.
Hey, Cliff. Good morning, Cliff. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good. Y'all got me fired up.
Okay. You got 2 minutes.
Anytime y'all talk about schools, I got to I got to get on here.
All right. Well, you got 2 minutes. Go ahead. We're going to give them to you.
All right. We have got to do better as a society, as a people, and as people in general. We have got to go back to the ways that your generation is with the yes, ma'am, yes, sir. I still say yes, ma'am, yes, sir, because that's how I was raised. But these kids have no respect. They don't even fear nothing.
No.
They don't fear the laws. They don't fear the parents. They don't fear nothing. And it's sad. It's really sad.
And we're paying a price for it.
Yes, we are.
We're paying a price for it because kids, like I said, when I was growing up, kid, you were seen and not heard. You didn't talk back to adults. No.
Yeah, but the adults also had a situation where they would work with each other, to make sure
the village.
They make sure that that you were raised well.
Yeah.
Because I remember as a kid, people used to say, Ruby, I saw your son down. I was like, oh God, no, here we go.
Right. You're hoping she addressed it.
Exactly. Well, what did he do? Well, he was saying this, and he was, come here, boy. I was like, man, I thought we had already negotiated this. We were going to keep our mouth shut.
No.
But that's what we need. That's where we.
Well, that's what worked.
Yeah.
That's what worked. Cliff, any problem? We got to run. I know what you'd call it a little earlier.
Right.
You know, but we got to get you, like I said, look at your schedule. We're going to be off next week, but let us know when you're available to come in to the studio.
I'll let y'all know when I'm available so I can come on your show.
Definitely.
And talk about the event I'm having in July. So
definitely. We'll make time for it.
I hope y'all two be there because I want y'all to be like guest speakers or something.
Let us know. We'll be there.
Let us know.
Yeah. All right.
All right, then.
Thanks, sir.
All right. Be blessed.
All right, well, Dr. Bradley, looks like that's going to do it for us here. Like I said, we're going to enjoy the rest of this day here.
We're logging off early?
We're going to do our promo with the pastor.
Oh yeah, we do have that on.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're going to enjoy the rest of this weekend.
I hear you.
I'm going to enjoy my vacation.
Well, I hear you, brother. I got to cut grass and do all the things that we do.
Give you my address.
I hear you, dog. I'm going to try to hit the golf course at some point.
All right. Well, folks, you've been listening at the Round Table, man. We are happy and enjoy spending the time with you. Until next time,
be blessed.
Family out the trap. It's a dream for us lost souls brought up in the mix. I'm motivated by the artists coming out in my midst. And the artists that paved the way when I didn't exist. Music's a skyscraper, I'm just trying to add a couple bricks.
This is for the dreamers.